Happy Sabbath. I was going to say, this is kind of like a classroom. All the kids sit to the back and don't fill up the front rows. Maud, thank you for your story. That's a kid's version of what I'm going to share today. So we can just go home, can't we? We've had the sermon already. And it's amazing how God works. The songs that have been chosen today just fit really nicely what I'm going to share with you. Some of you may not know me. My name is Isabelle Millien, and I'm here today with my family. My husband Stefan, Valerie, my daughter, and Zane, who's hiding in the pews playing. And we usually worship at Morphett Vale, and this is our second Sabbath in a row here. When I went home yesterday and I said to the kids, we're going to Brighton, Zane said, again? Because we were here last week because Valerie is part of Brighton Pathfinder Club. We moved here in January, as this year I've been the deputy at Prescott College Southern. And yesterday our leadership team was having lunch. We're celebrating Nigel because he's retiring next year. And in the middle of lunch, my phone pinged and I looked down and there was a message from Pastor Caden that read, I've got the message here, is, "Hi Isabel, any chance you're available to preach tomorrow?" The message came in at 1:11 We had Yoshi coming. He's contacted me. He's unable to come, so I'm desperately searching for someone. And I closed my eyes and I said, really, Lord, after the week I've had, it's been our last week of school. We've had so many programs on and I was looking forward to Friday afternoon and just crashing. And in my head, God said, say yes. So here I am this morning. With you. I'm not sure if the news has reached you yet, but I've been appointed principal next year. And no, David, you will not call me boss. I do not like that word. I've already been talking to Pastor Caden about how we can make some stronger connections with you. I'd love to come once a term and just give a principal's report so that you know what's happening at our school. And we're working on a date so that our Cambodia group can come back. They had a blessed time. I've seen lots of photos and heard lots of stories, and they'd like to come back and share with you because you contributed towards that trip. We've also had 12 students already commit to our 2026 trip, so it's a blessing. It's already doubled. The last part of Term 4 has been really eventful, and that's like that in every single school. And I wanted to share some highlights with you for our Term 4. In week 3, we had our student leaders for next year go to a Christian leadership summit, and it was in the north. It took us about an hour to drive there. They were so inspired by what they saw. It was a summit for students taken by students. There was no adults up the front. And they were so inspired that they are wanting to run something similar for our Christian schools in the south. And we're also going to do something for our state schools as part of a service project in our last week. In week 7, we had year 6, 9s and 11s, and I know that Ruby was instrumental with the year 11s in that space. We had an ADRA fair, and we had our students and families come along, and we were able to raise $4,522 towards ADRA. We've celebrated our Year 12s. We had 45 Year 12s graduate this year and our other students at our student ward services. And last Friday, we had a full church with majority being non-church families attending our Christmas service, where students sang and we had Pastor Hunter share the meaning of hope through our Christmas story. The last 3 days of school saw our Year 7s to 9s serving others by making cookies for our ADRA hampers, helping the primary classes clean their rooms, and we even visited the Calvary Retirement Village. Some of our staff wanted to stay. They fitted really nicely in with the retirement people there. We had to drag them back on the bus. But we're hoping to build a connection with them and one of our classes adopt Calvary and be able to go across and visit with the elderly. As we wrap up the year, Nigel and I have been doing handover, and I'm so excited that we've appointed our new secondary deputy, Lati Alafeo, who is here this week looking for housing, and she'll be moving down next year with her family of 3 children and her husband, Michael. We're also welcoming new Adventist teachers next year, and one of us is visiting with us today, Rebecca Wave. Rebecca Mitchell is from the school that I came from in Mackay. She's going to be our new head of Bible at our school. I'm so excited to be stepping into leading Prescott Southern, and I would ask you to continue praying for me and the team there as we continue to lean on God as we lead. Let's bow our heads before we start. Heavenly Father, please be with me as I speak, Lord. Take away my nerves. May you open up everyone's hearts and minds to receive your message, Lord. May they see you and not me. We ask all of this in your holy, precious name. Amen. This year, I'm sure lots of you have set New Year's resolutions. Yes? Have some of you... There's some chuckles. Is that failure? Is that chuckles of failure because you haven't quite gotten there? This year I set a New Year's resolution to read the Bible cover to cover. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but in my adult life I've tried many times to do this and I have failed each time. And I can tell you that I am up to I'm going to start week 50. So I'm actually going to succeed that on December 31st I have read the whole Bible. I didn't do it chronologically. I think the last time I tried, that's why I failed. I stopped somewhere in Judges where God says, I've had enough, and I shut the Bible and went, that's a bit scary. But this year I've done it through topics, and it's been a lot easier to go through. So in a couple of weeks ago, I was in Deuteronomy 15, and it was talking about releasing Hebrew slaves. And in verse 15, this is what it reads. Remember that you were once slaves in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. This is why I have given you this commandment. And at that moment, I can actually, in my iPad, I was taking notes, and I wrote down next to that verse, that would be a really good sermon one day. Remember where you've come from. I didn't know a couple of weeks ago that I would need it to be able to lean into that space. I've grown up a Christian. I'm a fourth generation Adventist. My mum grew up a Catholic, and she struggled in Mauritius because the Bibles were Latin, but they spoke French. So she went to church with my dad, and she loved that Adventists dug into the Bible and we do our own studies. So we've been raised Adventist, and I've always lived by the verse from Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you. Even to the point of when I met my husband, Steph, I should have already been married. That's not today's testimony. That's another story. But growing up, I didn't like school. I struggled to read, to write, and to even do maths. And in my primary years, I had a primary teacher, who will not be named, who called me dumb in front of all my peers. And it was really hard for me to get out of that box. I even struggled at the beginning of high school. And by the time things started to make sense to me, I had already become that rat bag student. And I was in and out of the principal's office. And my mum was called to school on a number of occasions. I couldn't wait to be done with school. I did a year of uni when I finished school, but didn't like it. And I stopped, and I was sitting at home. I was working with my dad for some of the days. He was a builder, but I wasn't really doing much with my life. And one of my nice primary teachers knew that I was sitting at home, and she said, Isabelle, why don't you come to school and be my teacher's aide? And I said to her, what is that? She goes, you'll be photocopying, you'll be laminating. At least it'll get you out of the house. So she was a prep teacher, and I went into her classroom, sat at the back, started cutting out, laminating, photocopying. I was the old school teacher's aide. And slowly, bit by bit, she started giving me groups of students to work with. And because I struggled as a student, I was able to explain to them how to do things. And I fell in love with that spark in their eye of when they had that aha moment of being able to understand something. And my heart grew to love working with students and working with young people. Even in those moments, though, when I felt God calling me to ministry, I ended up at Avondale studying theology. because back then in the early 2000s, ministry was becoming a church pastor. Did 6 months, aced Greek, can't remember any of it now, but back then I could understand it. Had to come home after 6 months, and I went back into teacher aiding. And God slowly spoke to me and said, teaching is your ministry. I want you to go do that. Some of my teachers would have laughed at the fact that I ended up studying teaching. And I still remember at Avondale going to Macquarie College on my first prac. I was sitting in the staff room and sitting there waiting for staff worship, and in walks my ex-principal. And he walks into the room. This has been years apart, probably about 8 years apart. And he still remembered my name, and he sees me sitting there in a big booming voice. He goes, "Isabelle, are you becoming a teacher?" And I just ducked my head. I didn't know what to say to him. And this year in May, he actually came when all the principals and deputies had their meeting here in Adelaide. And I got to say to him, "Hey, guess what? I'm a deputy." It's been an interesting journey that God's taken me on. And I know that now I can lean into that space, because I often get students in my office that are sitting exactly where I was. And I tell them, I was you one day. And they're just like, "No way, you're a deputy." And I go, "No, I was that ratbag kid. And you can change your life. You can make sure that you don't have to be that same person." So I'm so glad that God's given me that story. Today is exactly 1 year, the 13th of December, exactly 1 year ago that I interviewed for the deputy's job here in South Australia. And I'm in awe of what God has done in that year. And I need to take you back for you to understand. It was mid-2021, and we had moved to Mildura for me to have a leadership position. And every time I step into this church, it takes me back to Mildura, because it's a mini version of the church in Mildura. And I was head of primary there. But I was still mainly in the classroom. I only had 4 sessions a week to come out of my class and to support the primary teachers that I had around me. So somewhere in the second year, I started to look for my next leadership opportunity. And Steph at the time, we had both been working part-time. Zane was only 2 years old. But when we moved to Mildura, he went to full-time being with the kids, and I was full-time working. And he was planning to work, but COVID struck, and it was, a good opportunity for him to stay at home with the kids. So I applied for the deputy principal role here at PPN. And a couple of weeks into that process, I also applied for the principal's position, a deputy principal's position in Mackay, Queensland. And that position was a prep to year 12 position. So I'm a primary teacher, but it was going to be a slightly different role. We decided as a family that Mackay was going to be the best spot for us. I remember I was heading to school to do my interview, and Steph texted me and said, "It's only an hour away from Airlie Beach." Every time we holiday, we go to the beach. And so we were thinking, okay, Mackay's the place. It's nice and warm. It's Queensland. Let's head there. I got offered the job there a day after the interview. We accepted. This all happened before I even interviewed for PPN. I remember accepting the job, and I called Steve Cowley, who was the ed director at the time, and he said, "Oh, Isabelle, I've got to save your number in my phone because we've got that interview tomorrow." And I said, "Well, I'm actually calling you and I've accepted another job." He was disappointed, but he understood. And I believe, looking back, God needed me to go to Mackay, and that was my training ground. Being a small school can be a blessing. For example, I basically knew all of the 290 students' names from prep to year 12. Here, I've struggled to learn the 350 names in the secondary. And some days I walk past a student and I think, "Are they new?" And I thought, no, they must have been here before, but it's hard to remember all of them. However, being in a small school can also be a burden. You don't have the resources to employ a lot of staff, yet you still have to cover the same amount of tasks. My days were long. I started covering relief teachers. So if a teacher called, and they would start contacting me about 5 o'clock in the morning. So from about 5:30, I would start relieving staff, and I would arrive to school somewhere between 6:30 and 7 o'clock. And unfortunately, I didn't leave school grounds until 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Some tasks just needed to be completed that day. I soon started realising that what I was doing was not sustainable, and I wasn't feeling appreciated by the staff and those around me. Each time I kept asking for help at conference level, it felt like the response was, "It's okay, Izzy can do that. She's a machine. We'll just let her keep going." Towards the end of term 3 in my last year, I saw the principal's job at PPN pop up again. And I thought, Adelaide, we potentially were going to go there a couple of years before. Maybe it's God's timing now. At the time, Steph was fasting and praying because he knew that the job at school was taking a toll on us as a family. And he was asking God, please fix this situation for us. Show us what the next steps are going to be. In his fasting, he clearly heard God saying, in 2025, you'll be in Adelaide. I completed the interview, we prayed, we waited. I was unsuccessful. We were confused about what Steph had heard. But I took it as we were still meant to be at Carlisle, and I kept trying to carry the load and work through difficult situations. In a single day, I would go from, I've got this, to I can't do this anymore. I felt like I was bipolar. It was just like this every day. It was late November and a situation unravelled at school. And in my tears and crying out to God, I remember him saying to me, Isabelle, it's time to leave. My response was, where am I going? But all I kept hearing him say is, don't worry about where, just leave. Now, normally, people don't resign from a job until they have somewhere to go. But God doesn't work with the normal, does he? He asked Noah to build an ark when Noah didn't even know what rain was. He asked Abraham to sacrifice his only son. He asked Gideon to fight a battle with 300 men. And now, he was asking me to step away from a job without having one to go to. Steph was working part-time. I was the breadwinner of the house. I remember that I didn't wrestle with it for too long. I made my mind up to follow God's prompting. I called my ed director at the time and told him that I was leaving, and I waited. Every day I would look at the Adventist job site. For those of you who aren't in that education realm, we've got a special site where everything pops up and you can have a look at all the jobs across Australia. And I was waiting. I still felt there was heaps of teaching jobs, but I still felt like God wanted me in leadership. So I was waiting for a leadership job. I started counting down on the calendar how many pays I would have left. And I thought, okay, I had been accepted to do my PhD through Avondale. And I thought, worst case scenario, I will do full-time studies and I'll just relief teach at a school somewhere in Mackay. That was our worst case scenario. It was around the 10th of December when school had already finished, and I checked the website again, and there I saw Deputy Principal Secondary at Prescott College Southern in Adelaide. I text John Lewis, who's the ed director and who I'd worked with previously, and I asked him, is this job legit or do you already have someone waiting in the wings? His response came quickly, and he called to talk to me about the school, and I sent through my resume. I had an interview, like I mentioned, on the 13th of December, and the whole time I was praying and asking God, is this what you meant when you said we would be in Adelaide in 2025? As a family, we boarded a cruise ship on the 17th of December for a 10-day Christmas cruise. The first few days were unsettling. They were sleepless nights. As we waited to hear, I made sure I got the Wi-Fi internet package so that I could be contactable. We were waiting to hear whether I was successful or if we were going to still be jobless. The text message came very late on the 19th, which was our 20th wedding anniversary, that I had been offered the job. For about a month, while we were waiting and trying to figure things out, I felt like Abraham, being asked to go, but not knowing where we were going. God's timing is truly amazing. And I thought that was the end of my testimony. But when I got here, I learned that the team down here was in panic mode because Nick Ellis had put in his resignation very late in the year. And the whole team was going, where on earth are we going to find a deputy that's experienced to step into that space? And that whole time I was up there going, God, where have you told me to go? When I first came, I was carrying a lot of baggage and hurt from my past job. As you can imagine, any of you that have been in a workplace that has been awful, that stays in your head. And I was praying really hard that God would take that away and that I'd be able to work with Nigel and that the school would accept me and that I'd be able to provide support to everyone in that space. It didn't take me very long to realise that I'd found my people. The staff at Prescott are amazing. The students want to be there. I enjoy connecting with the staff, the parents and the students, and I get to share my love of God with the students who still, most of them, are questioning whether or not there is a God. And I get to challenge them on a daily basis to open up their hearts and minds and listen to that small, still voice that they can hear. I felt a part of the community straight away, and Nigel has been amazing to work with. He is definitely a strong, calm leader. We were about halfway through the first term, and my daughter Valerie said to me, Mummy, I really like this version of you. I asked her what she meant, and she started to explain that I was home more, that I was cooking more, that I was more present in the family. It wasn't taking a toll on us anymore. A few months into the year, as I was doing my Bible reading, I came across Psalm 6. And I really connected with the psalmist when he said, I am worn out from sobbing. All night I flood my bed with weeping, drenching it with my tears. My vision is blurred by grief. My eyes are worn out because of all my enemies. Go away, all of you who do evil, for the Lord has heard my weeping. The Lord has heard my pleas. The Lord will answer my prayer. During those tough times, I cried a lot, but I felt like coming to Prescott, God had heard my cries. He had heard my anguish. I shared this testimony with Morfett Vale on the 30th of August. And I felt like I could keep sharing that testimony for the next 3 years. Like I'm riding on that, God took me out of that bad situation. And I kind of likened it to the book of Judges. And I did get through the book of Judges. You know how it's like, the Israelites are being oppressed and then a judge comes along and then there's, 5 years of peace or there's 40 years of peace. Prescott is my years of peace. I'm going to hold on to that. But my testimony doesn't stop there, because it was only a week after I shared with Morfett Vale that Nigel pulled Carl, our primary deputy, and me into his office and told us that he was retiring at the end of the year. And as those words came out of his mouth, my whole world started spinning. Straight away I started panicking and I thought, who's going to take over? Who am I going to be able to work with? Am I going to get a principal like I had before? And I thought I was stepping into that space of oppression. The promise that Steph had heard when he was fasting was twofold. He had heard, you'll be in Adelaide in 2025, and the next part of it was, you're going to do great things. I was in Nigel's office just a couple of hours after he told us he was leaving, And I was still processing it, and I was telling him, I'm not happy with you, because my plan was in November to sit down with him and say, hey, I love your leadership style. This is a great school. Can you please intentionally mentor me, because I feel like principalship is the next step. Can you please take me under your wing? But I didn't get that opportunity. And I was telling him, it's not fair. You need to stay. This is not my timing in all of it. And he said to me, Isabelle, you've been such an answer to prayer, and I want you to apply for the principal's job. And my head just went poof. I hadn't even thought of that possibility. I was thinking of everyone else who could come in, everyone else who would be leading the school, and I hadn't even thought about me stepping into that space. I had a plan. I'd started my PhD. I'd already said to Daniel Zilm, our Associate Ed Director, I'm going to finish that in 5 years, and when I finish it in 5 years, I'm going to be bored. You have to give me something else to do. I had a plan in place. And when I went home and shared with my family, Valerie quickly reminded me that only a week ago I had shared with Morfett Vale Isaiah 55 verse 8. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. We prayed, we talked as a family, and we prayed more. And I put in my application. And it was around the same time that I put in my application that I went to Melrose Park Church, and Yoshi was preaching, and he preached, I don't know if he's preached that sermon here this year, but he preached about if you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. Have you heard that sermon? And I really heard God loud and clear saying, Isabelle, I'm telling you to step out of the boat. Reflecting over this past year, and today being the day that I had the interview, I never would have imagined that God would have given me an opportunity to step into a principal space within a year of moving here. God is good, and he comes through for us. It may not always be in his way. It may not always be in his timing. In our timing. In Deuteronomy 31 verse 6 it says, so be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not panic before them, for the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. He will never fail you nor abandon you. In Deuteronomy 15, God asked the Israelites to remember who they were. Remember that he took them out of slavery, that he redeemed them. According to Google, the word remember is one of the most common significant words in the Bible, appearing over 1,200 times. It's often used as a command from God to his people to recall a promise of past actions or a covenant relationship. Steph and I often sit and remember. And this year we've been married 21 years, and there are lots of stories that we sit and remember. And we can clearly know that in those 21 years, God has been leading us all the way. In Isaiah 46 verse 9, it says, remember the things I have done in the past, for I alone am your God. I am your God, and there is none like me. As the year comes to an end, I challenge you to remember. Remember where God has taken you. Remember the good, the bad, the joys, the tears. Remembering helps us to count our blessings. It lets you see that God is in all the moments in your life. I pray that you can make some time in your life in the next 2 weeks as the year comes to an end to sit and remember and to thank God for the blessings. Amen.